Hi, I'm the amateur logician. Welcome to a short series on the philosophy of Rene Descartes. What's probably unique here is that you'll be hard-pressed to find a video series looking at Descartes from an Aristotelian or Thomistic point of view. At least that'll be part of what I'm going to do here. We'll start with doubt in the Cogito and move on from there. You can visit my website at amateurlogician.com. Now, many positive remarks can be made of Rene Descartes. He was an excellent writer, for one thing, and reading him, to me at least, is a great joy. Meditations on First Philosophy is really a cool read. It's a lot of fun, and Descartes is a lot clearer and easier than, say, Immanuel Kant or Hegel or Heidegger. Probably the only modern philosopher who compares to Descartes is David Hume, who was also an outstanding writer. With that said, let's begin with Meditation 1 concerning those things that can be called into doubt, and I'm going to quote him directly. Several years have now passed since I first realized how numerous were the false opinions that in my youth I had taken to be true, and thus how doubtful were all those that I subsequently built upon them. And thus I realized that once in my life I had to raze everything to the ground and begin again from the original foundations if I wanted to establish anything firm and lasting in the sciences. Descartes has a goal, and that is to obtain certainty, such that it cannot possibly be doubted as uncertain. So we might say, after observing and reflecting upon many of his ideas, he discovered them largely to be unsystematic and perhaps arrived at through undependable means. Moreover, a lot of things he thought were true were actually, in reality, false. And rather than looking at each of those ideas one by one, he saw it better to build up from a solid foundation that must be true. So if we can find that solid foundation that must be true, what logically follows from that foundation must also be true. And he has a method. It is to doubt everything in a systematic, universal way to find what cannot be doubted. And really, most of our knowledge seems that it could at least in principle be doubted. We can be mistaken to what we think is correct. However, to doubt is not to say something is false or true. Really, this means to suspend judgment. The method of doubt does not claim that he thinks everything is false. He's just suspending judgment. He's not saying things are false or true. That's it. Now, Descartes thought this was a reasonable starting point to find what cannot be doubted. And he compares this to sorting out a barrel full of apples. We want to take out the bad apples and only leave the good ones in. What is certain? What is not? And along the way, Descartes makes some observations. For example, he writes, I have noted that the senses are sometimes deceptive. Yet because sense perception has often misled him, ergo, sense perception can be doubted. Second, he notes that it appears impossible to know if he is sleeping currently or awake. Ergo, given a situation, maybe an illusion and a dream, it can be doubted. So it's impossible to know if I'm sleeping or awake presently. However, he notes, for whether I'm awake or asleep, 2 plus 3 make 5. So even in a dream, I cannot doubt basic truths of arithmetic. However, third, maybe there is an evil genius, supremely powerful and clever, who has directed his entire effort at deceiving me. He's trying to deceive me even about, perhaps, basic truths of mathematics. And so I can even doubt basic truths of mathematics given the possibility that there exists some evil genius. And so, in this method of doubt, there really are 3 stages. So the first stage deals with doubting sense perception. The second stage deals with knowing if reality around me is just a dream, or if it's not a dream, is it an illusion? And the third is a possibility that there exists some evil deceiving spirit, or evil genius, or evil, so to speak, God who's deceiving me. So the question is, can something certain withstand these 3 stages? Meditation 2 concerning the nature of the human mind, that it is better known than the body. According to Rene Descartes, it seems, I can doubt almost everything. I can doubt my senses. Sometimes my senses have deceived me, they have tricked me. Thus, I seem to have good reason to suspend my judgment over them. I can doubt them. Additionally, I can even doubt the existence of my physical body. After all, perhaps it's an illusion. I might be dreaming that I have a physical body, but in reality, I don't have one. In that sense, it seems there's nothing logically contradictory about denying its existence. Therefore, I can doubt I have a physical body. Now, doubting my memory is pretty easy to do, because it has failed me more often than I would like to admit, and I can doubt the existence of the external world. There does appear to be a lot of things surrounding me, like a computer, a microphone, and so on and so forth, but maybe they don't really exist out there in the world. They might be a figment of my imagination. But note, remember that Descartes is not making a claim that the external world doesn't exist. He is rather claiming that it's open to doubt, that's all. Nevertheless, there is a very controversial assumption that is implicit in Descartes' reasoning here. Since it seems we only have access to our own experience and can directly perceive only our ideas, according to Descartes it seems, we can thereby doubt the existence of the external world. But this is predicated on his notion that we only perceive what we think of the external world immediately, via our ideas, whereas only ideas do we perceive immediately. And this is a very controversial assumption, and we can doubt that assumption, by the way. So we immediately perceive our ideas, but only immediately experience what we think of as the external world through our ideas. But is that correct? Is there no access to the external world that's more direct? And is everything filtered through our ideas? For example, sense perception doesn't seem to be an idea as such, right? So, insofar as that is an assumption to Descartes' argument, that seems a little bit dubious. It's highly controversial, and I think an Aristotelian Thomist would challenge that type of move. But in any case, it does make sense how he does doubt the external world based on his thought experiment. But moving on, also, and to quote Descartes directly, since I judge that others sometimes make mistakes in matters they believe they know most perfectly, may I not, in a like fashion, be deceived every time I add 2 and 3? Can I not make a mistake over the most elementary of arithmetic? In fact, later in Meditation 3, Descartes writes, I did decide later on that I must doubt these things, such as 2 plus 3, but that was only because it occurred to me that some God could, perhaps, give me a nature that I might be deceived even about matters that seemed almost evident. There might be, so to speak, an evil God or an evil trickster or an evil genius, an evil spirit out there, tricking me on the most of basic things such as 1 plus 1 or 2 plus 3. Thus, I might be getting tricked over basic math, and thus I can doubt basic math. And this brings a very radical doubt, arguably far more radical than doubting the senses. Remember the 3 stages here. Simply, Descartes supposes the possibility of a deceiving spirit or, so to speak, an evil God, because it brings about the strongest and the broadest doubt possible. We have this radical doubt. So, if we think about what we can doubt, on the one hand, we can doubt empirical claims, these are a posteriori, such as the existence of the external world. But if we have, so to speak, an evil God or some evil trickster out there, some spirit out there who's tricking us on very basic things, we can then doubt not only a posteriori claims, that is, claims we have to discover through experience in the world, such as, what is a tree, what is, some chemical formula, whatever. But we also can doubt basic truths that are a priori. For example, in math, It is arguable that stages 1 and 2 will not lead to this radical doubt. True, our senses sometimes deceive us, but other times they seem not to. Dreams can deceive us, but they do contain real aspects of reality that are not deceptive. So therefore, Descartes requires, it seems, this third stage. But nowhere, by the way, does Descartes suggest that such a being actually exists. He doesn't say there's an evil God. He doesn't say that there is a evil, deceiving spirit. Rather, he only argues that we cannot be absolutely sure that such a being doesn't exist. So whereas stages 1 and 2 bring a milder skepticism, so to speak, stage 3, I should say, brings a much more radical skepticism, a radical doubt. And so Descartes is doubting everything he can doubt. He then seems to go even further. Why not think all of these doubtful things are actually false? It is at least possible. They might be false, and that's exactly why I can doubt these things. To quote Descartes, "Therefore I suppose that everything I see is false. I believe that none of what my deceitful memory represents ever existed. I have no sense whatever. Body, shape, extension, movement, and place are all chimeras. However, as I'm doing all this doubting, there is something certain. There's a doubter. For that I can be certain that I exist." So we have the method of doubt, and with it, we reach that I exist. I cannot doubt that I exist. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. When I try to doubt my existence, I fail, because there needs to be a doubter that exists to doubt. Thus, after using his method of doubt, Descartes finds that he cannot doubt his own existence to himself. So even if there's a demon out there, and it's deceiving him to believe in nonsense, it's telling him that 1 + 1 is 7, it's telling him that a triangle is the same thing as a square, or whatever, he is certain that he exists at least in order to think about all those nonsensical things that the demon is tricking him over. Likewise, I cannot doubt I exist because doubting presupposes something existing to doubt. And here we see that Descartes takes it as evident that we are conscious when we think. That is, we know we are thinking. He additionally thinks it's incorrigible. That is, it's absolutely true that if I think, then I'm thinking. So it's true, I'm thinking if I think I'm thinking. Nevertheless, there are different interpretations about this Cogito, about the Cogito argument. I think, therefore I am. For instance, is my existence an inference? So here we have two propositions. I think, thus I exist. Another interpretation is that it's performative, and here there's only one proposition. The idea is if I deny this one proposition, I think, therefore I am, this leads to a contradiction, or a performative contradiction. For example, if I say I don't exist, that's clearly self-defeating because in order to say it, it requires my existence. Or if I said, it is impossible for me to speak English, well, that's self-defeating because I just spoke in English, so it's obviously a false statement. So perhaps it's performative. Another interpretation is that it's just an intuition or self-evident, and this also just has one proposition. That is, we just see this one proposition as self-evidently true. We have an intuition. But then, why does Descartes suggest two propositions with this ergo? So why does he say, I think, therefore I am? Doesn't that indicate an inference? But regardless of the correct interpretation, it does seem that we've reached something. We have reached that I exist. I cannot deny this to myself. It's clear I exist. And so it turns out that Descartes' first principle really is his own existence. He cannot doubt to himself that he exists. This is certain. It's his first principle. And it's from this first principle that he tries to build an entire philosophical system on or from. But there's actually a giant problem here. So Descartes thinks he has reached rock bottom. Nevertheless, he clearly hasn't. He thinks he exists. Great. I will not dispute him there. I don't think anyone should dispute him, on that point at least. I exist. I'm not going to deny my existence. But that principle presupposes more fundamental or deeper principles. And since that is the case, Descartes failed to reach rock bottom. He failed to reach a first principle, because there are more fundamental principles, deeper principles, that must be affirmed. Now, perhaps the greatest theologian of the 20th century is Father Garrigou-Lagrange. And there's a great book called Philosophizing in Faith that was recently translated into English from French. And it's a wonderful book. There's an essay on Descartes. And this essay is a pretty traditional critique of Descartes. And I'm going to mention some of the points in that essay. And one of the major things is that the Cogito, I think therefore I am, is not most fundamental. In fact, being is most fundamental. Existence is more fundamental. The basic metaphysics of Aristotle and Aquinas and so on and so forth is much more fundamental. So pace Descartes, or with respect to Descartes, it's actually being, existence, that is the most universal notion, and in fact is presupposed by all other notions. And with that comes the principle of non-contradiction, or PNC for short. To quote Aristotle, it is impossible for the same thing to belong and not to belong at the same time to the same thing and in the same respect. And this principle, PNC, as a true first principle, doesn't presuppose any other principle. You reach rock bottom with PNC, or another principle like that. I think therefore I am is an only coherent principle if PNC is presupposed. But then, because of that fact, the Cogito is not a true first principle. If PNC is not assumed, there's no way Descartes can say, I think therefore I am. His entire system collapses. There are more fundamental, deeper ontological principles necessary for Descartes to even claim he exists, or for me to claim that I exist. So we have this principle. According to Descartes, it supposedly is a first principle. I think, therefore I am. But it actually presupposes a lot of things, including the principle of non-contradiction. In other words, it's impossible for the same thing to both be and not be in the same respect and time. However, if PNC is not presupposed, I think, therefore I am, can both be true and false simultaneously. And then, if it's possible that I am and I am not, then the Cogito is clearly false. But the Cogito is true. But because it is true, then the Cogito cannot be a first principle. Moreover, it even presupposes the fact that whatever thinks is, and that whatever acts exists. The notion of existence, of being, of ontology is presupposed here. For example, as I claim I think therefore I am, there is clearly thought. But notice, and this is very important, the I isn't identical to the thought I think therefore I am. They're clearly distinct. I think therefore I am is a proposition. So, while I'm thinking about this proposition, it therefore follows, based on Descartes' standard, that I can doubt that thinking requires my existence. However, the Cogito is true. Therefore, it must presuppose that whatever things exist and whatever acts exist. First premise, everything that thinks exists. Second premise, I think. Conclusion, therefore, I exist. So, because it presupposes such a principle, the Cogito cannot be a first principle. Furthermore, consider this method of doubt. We're doubting everything. But if the only thing that cannot be doubted is the Cogito, I think, therefore I am, then I can doubt the principle of non-contradiction. However, if I can doubt the principle of non-contradiction, then there's nothing logically stopping me from doubting the Cogito, except perhaps some ad hoc restriction. But other than that, I'm going to doubt the Cogito, and it's going to fall apart. But there's more to it than this. So if we have a so-called idealist philosopher, and perhaps I'm using idealist in a idiosyncratic way in terms of the definition, but leaving that aside, an idealist philosopher only has access to his thinking. Okay, I have my ideas, but I have no direct access to anything outside of my ideas. For example, to the external world. Everything's filtered, let's say, through my ideas. So he only knows things through representations he has created. But then, how can he know the I? Huge problem. How can he know that I? Because, after all, doesn't he have this filter even for that? Because it's just an idea? He will be stuck with the claim there is thought. Okay, there is thought. But to claim there's an I exist is really an ontological claim that goes beyond the claim there is thought. And in fact, this Aristotelian critique, interestingly enough, parallels the dilemma brought up by Bertrand Russell, who certainly was not a Thomist or anything like that. So he brings up an argument that parallels this one that you find with Garrigou-Lagrange. And let's get into that right now. Here we have the famous dilemma of the Cogito. I think, therefore I am. And Bertrand Russell raises this objection based on the use of the I. On the one hand, we can think of the I as having thoughts, but isn't identical to those thoughts. That's horn 1. Alternatively, we can think of the I as identical to thoughts. That's horn 2. Nevertheless, in either case, the Cogito doesn't work. Why is that? Think of horn 1. So if we have the premise, I am thinking, remember, that doesn't yield I exist. Why? Because I can doubt an I that thinks and is not identical with thoughts. In fact, David Hume famously debated if we could know an existing self is even distinct from thoughts. Now, we might think that's crazy, but nevertheless, you can raise that issue. On the other hand, with horn 2, if the I just means thoughts, then we cannot say I exist. All we can say is there is thought. And that does not equal I exist. Now we might think that, for example, there is a distinction between a substance and an accident. If I say, I am thinking, but isn't thinking, so to speak, some kind of property or accident, loosely speaking, of a substance or a subject? But there's a problem here. Descartes' method of doubt wouldn't allow me to assume there is such a thing as an accident or a substance or a property. So he's throwing out all of that ontological framework. But in fact, to say there is a self, you need an ontological framework. To say I exist depends upon an ontological framework of existence. And that's the huge problem for Descartes. And so his Cogito doesn't work. I don't know about you, but I find that critique extremely interesting and cool. Both Garrigou-Lagrange and Bertrand Russell have powerful critiques, and it's clear why a Thomist such as Garrigou-Lagrange would be critical of the Cogito. It, in fact, to be coherent at all, presupposes the principle of non-contradiction, and it presupposes an ontology of being, of existence. And we'll continue to study Descartes. Part 2 will be on the fallacious Cartesian circle and God. I hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll see Part 2. And you can support my work at amateurlogician.com. I would appreciate it. I hope to see you soon. Bye for now.